All right, Reed, so there's no stat that correlates more closely with handicap than greens in regulation. It's like
Yeah.
the single most important thing. The more greens in regulation you hit, the lower your scores and vice versa.
Yeah.
So when you're coming back from an off season or you're really trying to round into form during a season, getting your irons in order is like hugely important.
Yeah, I mean, I think strokes gained, irons is kind of key. That's how that's Tiger Woods' whole career.
It's like the
Yeah.
separator from
Yeah.
every level, like hitting your irons well. So let's get into it. Let's figure out how to help ourselves hit irons better and everybody else out there.
The first thing in the foundation of being a good iron player is solid contact.
Yeah.
You have to understand that hitting an iron shot, especially a short iron shot, is much different than hitting a driver. You're going to have a much more descending blow. That's why you take a divot, and you don't take a divot with a driver. But if you're not hitting it off the center of the club face, you're not going to be able to get consistent landing yardages. And so when you're practicing, I want you to focus on that. I don't want you to be trying to hit it as hard as you can. I want you to be trying to hit it solid time after time, get consistent trajectory and consistent, contact.
This is a really good point. And there's actually a really good Golf Digest Schools series by Michael Bree called Facts of Impact. Go check it out. But really, he talks about exactly this, that the key to being a consistent iron player isn't about necessarily direction. I mean, of course, like the best players hit it straighter, but it's about consistency and contact, that you're really trying to avoid those like hitting too far behind the ball, hitting too far in front of the ball, skulls, thins, chunks. Like those are the disaster shots that are going to cost you hitting a bunch of greens and hitting a bunch of scores. So really, that's something that pros do so well, is that they dial in the low point of their golf swing, they hit the ball consistently, and being able to repeat that is something that should be pretty high on our priority list next time we go to the range too.
We just really want to remember what the point of an iron shot is. You're trying to hit a green, you're trying to hit a target. Distance wise, it's very different than a driver or a 3-wood, where if you're going down a long fairway and you're hitting a driver as hard as you can, and you go, oh no, I hit that 10 yards longer than I thought I would.
Yeah.
No one's going to care.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Hurt you at all. If you have a 7-iron into an island green and you hit it good, and you're like, oh no, I hit that 10 yards too long, you're screwed.
Yeah.
So iron shots, power is not as important. It's all about consistency in strike and consistency in distance.
Yeah, and and that's why I wouldn't get hung up on direction too much with this stuff.
Yeah.
Because to your point, like if you hit a driver off the tee and you're like, damn, I hit that 10 yards right, that's not going to kill you. But again, you hit an iron 10, 15, 20 yards to the right, like you're missing the green, you're chipping all of a sudden. It's a whole different thing. What matters is the contact.
That's right. One great way to kind of improve your contact in the off season is, make sure that your head is not moving all over the place. There's different trainings you can do. You can use mirrors. You can go ahead and take a video, but you want to make sure you're rotating around a stable center. There shouldn't be a lot of motion in any of your golf swing, honestly, but especially in your iron shots when you're not pushing it to 100%. It should be very, very rare when you're on the golf course hitting a full out iron shot. If you see it on the PGA Tour, you see high level golfers, it's very rare they're flushing a 7-iron full on. So don't go into practicing your irons like that. Just be focusing on your trajectory, be focusing on your impact, be focusing on the stability of your golf swing.
It's a bit of a nerdy term, but when we talk about like sequencing, that's a really important one too,
Yeah.
And what we're talking about with there is that, that you're not hanging back on your right side and flipping at it. You look at what the pros do, what a million coaches say. You got to get your hips moving towards the target. You got to get that weight on your sort of front foot by the time you're approaching impact.
Yes.
That's really important to helping the low point of your swing be slightly past the ball and hit the ball first and then the ground.
Absolutely. And so kind of, in the off season, getting ready, like sharpening up, like what can you do that's an easy thought? And not everyone has access to some sort of a simulator or some sort of a TrackMan machine. And if you don't, you don't. But if you are able, in the Northeast, if you're able to get into a simulator room, spend an hour hitting some pitching wedges, hitting some 9-irons, hitting some 8-irons, and actually write down what your carry yardages are. Because I can't even tell you how many amateurs, if you have a 12 handicap and you say, well, how far do you hit your 7-iron? They say 175 yards. And you're like, cool, how far does it carry? And they have no idea. But what really matters when you have to carry the water or when you have to carry that bunker on the back right part of the green? And so being aware going into the season what your carry numbers are with these different irons is very valuable information that the pros have down to an insane level, and amateurs have almost no awareness of it.
That is just such an important point. So it's like, look, like you should always be trying to focus on making solid contact.
Yeah,
but like that's kind of your non-starter thing you should always care about. Probably the best thing you can do for your game heading into a season is exactly what you just mentioned, right? Spending an hour on some kind of launch monitor situation. Obviously, there's a ton of affordable launch monitor options out there right now. Driving ranges, there's tons of them that are now equipped with things like top tracer technology, etc.
Yeah.
But if you just spend an hour and go through every club in your bag, hit about 5 shots with each, and like, sure, if you hit one top, throw that one out, but just try to get an average with each club. That is the single best thing you can do for your game, because it doesn't really matter how far you hit your irons. It matters that you know how far you hit your iron.
And this is something that you can't do, obviously if it's cold outside, if it's the Northeast and it's wintertime. But, Dr. Mo, when I was getting ready for a Q School one year, I just remember him just making sure that every single new course I went to, I would laser how far the flag was. It was 172. And then I would hit 1 or 2 iron shots in, let's say with an 8-iron. And he's like, go and pace off exactly where that ball lands. So if you don't have access to, a TrackMan or some sort of a, simulator, in the first couple rounds, you can do that. It's a bit more of a pain of a way to do it. But if you're able to laser and you're like, it's 172 yards to that pin, remember that. You hit your shot good, and then you say, okay, I'm going to actually find where that ball landed, not where it ended up, where it landed, pace it off, and then just note to self, okay, my 8-iron carried 168. And then once you get a couple of those in your notes, then you really are understanding exactly how far this ball is flying, and it makes such a difference, the carry number, because that's the most valuable number when it comes to your iron.
The trap that amateur golfers fall into so much is that they think they hit the ball further than they actually do.
Yeah.
And that's why they end up missing greens short like 80% of the time. 80% of the time they miss a green, they end up missing it short. And it's sometimes because they struggle with solid contact, which is natural, but also because they're underclubbing themselves. They hit a 7-iron 180 yards once during a dry day, downwind in Scotland, and they think that that's their stock 7-iron when that's not the case. And you will hit more, no matter what your skill level, you'll hit more greens if you simply know that your 7-iron doesn't go 180, that it goes 140.
An amateur will look at it and it'll be like a downhill hole, and he'll hit a 7-iron and it will roll out 20 yards, and he's like, wow, I hit my 7-iron 180. It's like, no, you didn't. You hit your 7-iron 161 and you got a really hard, firm bounce. And so understanding that makes it very valuable on the next hole when you have an uphill hole and you're going to get no roll and you're 170 yards out and you're like, oh, I can get there with my 7-iron easily. No, you can't.
Yeah.
And so it's very valuable information, and information that's not that hard to gain, whether you have access to a simulator or whether you're going to kind of pace it off and do it the old-fashioned way. Getting those numbers, it's worth it. It's going to be worth it all season to you.
Yeah. And so as far as like breaking down a few ways of actually doing it, I know we touched on it, but there are varying ways in which you can do it. Like probably the best way of doing it is going to a coach who has a TrackMan, or going to a range that has one, hitting like 18 different golf balls and then averaging them all out. That's probably like the statistically best way of doing it, right?
And then you nix the ones where you really mishit it. Because I mean, you don't want to be, so it has to be at least a decent strike. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I flushed it every time. But if you do go ahead and like completely chunk it, don't
throw that one out.
Obviously don't put that into the equation.
Exactly. And then, but then there are ways you can do it more simply. So you can hit 5 golf balls. And again, if you hit 5 golf balls and you hit one kind of chunky, then you just average out the 4 or 3. That will give you a good handle on your yardage. And if you don't have time to do that, you can do it the old-fashioned way, which is literally just hitting 1 or 2 balls into a freaking field, and then just stepping it off.
Yeah, just
literally
it off.
Any way you can measure like how far you hit your irons will improve your iron game in some way, shape, or form.
Yep, and don't think you just want to do it with 90-yard shots. you want to know how far that 4-iron is carrying, because literally, if you're 180 yards away and your 4-iron has to carry that water, it's just as valuable. So please don't just go to a wedge range. Make sure you actually gain the information from pitching wedge all the way to 4-iron.
All the way to 4-iron. And just a one final quick shout out for like, trying to dial in your wedges too is a pretty useful thing, right?
Oh yeah.
Like you hit a pitching wedge. Oh, my pitching wedge goes 100 yards or whatever, and then maybe you take a half swing, goes 50 yards. Just any frame of reference you can give yourself yardage wise for each club in your bag, super important.
No, if you just do that, make sure that you have solid contact by having a slightly more stable swing and understanding that you have to have a descending blow with your irons. That's key number one. And then once you get that solid contact, make sure you know the distances. And I think that's the main keys, huh?
Yep, and your game will be in much better shape because of it.